money always
Yeah,
applies.
well, we have the
You can
benefit.
go back.
You got, yeah.
Even with that, the short answer is I'm really not sure. I think, again, there was so much societal uh, passion, anger, determination built up that was beyond Netanyahu or any one leader. This had so much momentum. There was such a freight train moving at 60 miles an hour down the track that I'm not sure anyone or anything could have stopped it. And I believe personally, if the United States had come to the conclusion that we shouldn't be involved in this and said, without us, it would have continued anyway. But by the way, and this is important too, there were so many concentric circles that had to be dealt with. One was, of course, again, making sure, and this was the necessary thing to do, to try to make sure that October 7th would not happen again. And that meant, at the very least, dismantling Hamas's military capacity, which, again, the Israelis accomplished well over a year ago. And it would also be nice to get the leaders who were responsible for the horror of October 7th. But there were other things that were necessary at the same time. One was to prevent a wider war. And, it's so easy to forget, but there were many moments when it looked like there was a real possibility that Iran would get into the act, Hezbollah would get into the act. The Houthis ended up getting into the act, but it didn't do much fundamental damage. And there was a real risk of a much wider war. Part of averting that wider war was making sure that Israel continued to have a strong deterrent so that anyone who thought about getting into it knew that they would bear the consequences. That was important. And then, of course, getting the hostages out and the plight of civilians who were caught in the middle of all of this. We had to deal with all of those at the same time. One of the big challenges was this. Hamas was looking very carefully at what its potential saviors were doing. So was Iran going to come in? Was Hezbollah going to come in? They were also looking very carefully at the relationship between Israel and its various supporters around the world, starting with the United States. And we saw this, time and again. We picked this up. Whenever they saw Israel becoming more isolated, when, for example, early on, some countries recognized Palestine, when there were ICC indictments against Netanyahu and the defense minister, when in the open, some real differences between the United States and Israel over going into Rafah emerged, Hamas pulled back from the negotiations on a ceasefire. And so we were in a position where whatever we were saying to the Israelis in private, it was also important in public to try to minimize the daylight, because that would actually, more daylight would actually perpetuate the conflict, because it would make getting to a ceasefire more difficult. All of those things made this incredibly complex. Now, when Iran attacked Israel, and Israel not only effectively, with our huge assistance, never seen before, including with Americans putting themselves in harm's way, rallying other countries, including in the region, to defend Israel against these missile and drone attacks, not once but twice. When those were effectively defeated, when Israel took out Iran's air defenses, leaving it very vulnerable, when Hezbollah was knocked back in ways that had never been before, that radically changed the equation. It minimized, if not eliminated, the possibility of a wider war, because these other actors were in no position to conduct it. That sent a strong message to Hamas. Obviously, eliminating some of its leadership had an effect in both directions. It sent a strong message to them. It did make negotiations more complicated. But it took a long time to get into a position where Hamas no longer thought, hey, the cavalry's coming to the rescue, or thought that we were going to abandon Israel, which would only, in my judgment, have perpetuated things, not finally, in our administration, landing them with a ceasefire.